Greetings. I am Dr. Corvus, and this is Miniature History: The Black Death. Between 1347 and 1350, approximately 20 million people in Europe died of what they called the Great Pestilence. When modern Europe has a population of roughly 745 million, 20 million doesn't seem that large. But given the estimated population of Europe at the start of the Black Death, between 30 and 50% of the total population was killed by the disease. To put that into perspective, the most recent pandemic the world has endured, COVID-19, had a mortality rate of between 1 and 2% and claimed roughly 7 million lives. If it had been as lethal as the Black Death, the number of dead in Europe alone would have been between 223 and 372 million. Nothing in modern history approaches that level of devastation. The closest equivalent would be the effects of a nuclear war. The Black Death reshaped society, changed the course of history, and took centuries to recover from. What caused it? A bacterium called Yersinia pestis, spread most commonly by flea bites. Depending on where the infection concentrates, it results in one of 3 forms of plague. Bubonic plague is the most common, in which the lymph nodes in the armpits or groin swell into dark buboes and sometimes burst. Pneumonic plague occurs when the lungs are deeply infected, which makes airborne transmission possible, and it becomes septicemic plague when the bloodstream itself becomes overrun by the bacteria. Untreated, bubonic plague kills 80% of those it infects within 10 days. Pneumonic plague kills 98% within 3 days, and there have been no recorded survivors of untreated septicemic plague, which can kill within 24 hours. Most terrifying of all, it can sometimes do so without presenting symptoms. Finally, there's evidence that in addition to the plague, an airborne version of anthrax was spreading at the same time, with its own mortality rate of roughly 75%. Even with modern medicine, these infections are incredibly lethal. Respiratory anthrax in particular, even treated, still kills 50 to 80% of those it infects. The name the Black Death didn't appear until 1555, and while one of the symptoms plague victims can experience includes the skin on the nose, lips, and extremities turning black as it dies, ironically, the name wasn't chosen to reflect that. While the source of the name remains elusive, the medieval response has been captured by history. Those with wealth fled to remote locations, seeking to avoid contagion, and this was somewhat successful. A lord's estate miles from a population center and enacting quarantine procedures did minimize risk. Yet even so, 25% of those who could flee still died. In villages, towns, and cities, where contagion could spread more effectively, 50% or more of the population died. In some cases, entire settlements were wiped out. Medieval medicine was quirky. When the source of disease was assumed to be God's punishment for sin, and real science had yet to develop, treatment focused on prayer, astrology, and superstition. Though when the plague continued to worsen, and that rationale began to stretch thin, medieval society looked for scapegoats. Travelers, criminals, and those seen as lesser or tainted were blamed for the plague. In 1348, Agimet of Geneva, after being put to torture a little, several times, confessed to being part of a vast Jewish conspiracy to poison the wells of cities throughout Europe. Medieval society had found its scapegoat. As the plague ravaged the world, the same story played out time and time again. Jews were arrested and tortured for weeks until they confessed, were forced to name co-conspirators, and those in power claimed justification for widespread acts of extreme violence. They were locked into houses which were then burned down. They were sealed into wine barrels and thrown into rivers. Or they were just cut down in the streets by angry mobs. Not everyone embraced the madness. Some priests and nobles were able to carve out places of relative safety, while others were compelled to give in to the bloodthirsty mobs as riots spread and their own lives were threatened. And some of those who resisted died at the hands of the terrified public. Burning half the Jews in Strasbourg and banning the rest from the city didn't save it from the plague, nor did any of the other desperate acts of cruelty. Cities were devastated, noble lines died out, and the dead piled up in the streets. If the Black Death were indeed a form of divine punishment, then perhaps fear, violence, and cruelty weren't the best ways to demonstrate faith. As terrible as it was, the Black Death offers some insights into how the world of your campaign might respond to a similar threat. Here are a few ideas to consider. The wealthy will usually flee to remote estates if they have the means, which means the manors of the wealthy within cities and towns will be left mostly uninhabited. This could make them ripe targets for theft, or they might be taken over by angry mobs or clever parties seeking refuge. The isolated estates could also become safe havens, assuming the defenses can be overcome, and that other refugees can be kept out. Displays of faith will be used to prevent sickness. Priests will carry saints' relics through the streets. Public blessings and ceremonies will be held to inspire divine protection, and sinners will be punished. Indulgences will also be sold, documents that grant the bearer divine rewards for earthly contributions. Not everyone selling them will be affiliated with the church, and in a world with low literacy rates, some of the documents won't even have real writing. As terror spreads, scapegoats will be found. Strangers and those already on the margins of society will be persecuted by an increasingly frantic population, though again, not everyone will support this. Your party could encounter a violent mob intent on burning innocent victims. Maybe they'll become the scapegoats themselves and will be forced to flee a mass of peasants bearing torches and pitchforks. Or perhaps they can manage to disperse the crowd peacefully. Once again, I am Dr. Corvus. Thank you for joining me for Miniature History, The Black Death. Most of the information here was found in the book In the Wake of the Plague by Norman F. Cantor. For more of my content, or to acquire my services as a voice actor, visit drcorvus.com.